The termination email arrived at 9:17 on the morning of the company's biggest product launch in 7 years. The subject line was 5 words. Your employment is hereby terminated. I read it at the hotel breakfast table, set my phone face down next to my orange juice, and finished my coffee. Across the table, my husband looked up from his laptop. He read something in my face. Not panic, not tears, just that very particular stillness I get when something enormous has been set into motion. He read the email once, closed his laptop, picked up his own phone and typed something I couldn't see. When he looked back at me, he was smiling. Not a warm smile, the other kind. She actually did it, he said. She did it in writing. On launch day, I lifted my coffee cup. Then we're ready. By noon, 47 calls had gone unanswered on my phone. My name is Dara. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 6 years I was the lead architect of a software system called ClearPath, an AI-driven patient intake and diagnostic routing platform used by over 200 hospital networks across the country. I built it from the ground up. I wrote the core algorithm during the first 8 months of my employment, working out of a rented office the size of a bathroom, surviving on bad coffee, and the specific kind of focus that only comes when you know exactly what you're building and why it matters. I supervised every integration across every hospital system, flew to 6 cities in 3 weeks to troubleshoot rollout problems that the sales team had created by overpromising, and debugged critical failures at 2 in the morning while my sister sent me photos from a resort in Cancun, and my mother left voicemails asking why I was still letting my work consume me. ClearPath was the reason the company had grown from a struggling health tech startup, burning through its seed round to a firm valued at $400 million. The founder, a genuinely visionary man with one catastrophic blind spot, which was his daughter, knew this. He told me so regularly, in the way that people tell you things they believe but haven't yet built policies around. What he never told me was how to protect myself from what came next. Fallon was 26 years old. She had a business degree from a school her father had endowed a building at, and she had never written a line of code or managed a technical deployment in her life. She had been at the company for 8 months, officially in a junior business development role that consisted primarily of attending meetings and summarizing them in bullet points. But her father loved her, the way certain fathers love certain daughters. Without limit, without calibration, in a way that had long since stopped incorporating new information. When he left for a 3-week international medical conference in Geneva, he handed her the interim CEO title like it was a birthday present. I watched him do it from the hallway outside the conference room. I watched her accept it the way someone accepts a crown they've spent years quietly believing they were owed. I had anticipated she might try something while he was gone. My husband had been anticipating it for longer than I had. Stellan is 35, an intellectual property attorney who spent the first decade of his career watching brilliant people lose the work of their lives because they had trusted relationships instead of contracts. He understands at a cellular level which clauses matter and which are decoration, and which ones become weapons depending on who pulls the trigger first. When I told him 3 years ago that Fallon had started referring to ClearPath in meetings as our platform in a way that quietly erased the word my, he sat down at our kitchen table and spent an entire Saturday renegotiating my employment contract. I sat beside him the whole time. I watched the language get sharper, more specific, more airtight. The founder signed it without reading Clause 12. Most people don't read Clause 12. That's the one that matters. What neither of us had predicted was that Fallon would be reckless enough to fire me on the actual launch day, not the week before. Not quietly, with an HR process and a paper trail that could be managed. She fired me 3 hours before the doors opened to 200 hospital executives and the investors who were deciding whether to write a check that would fund the company's next decade. She fired me at 9:17 in the morning with a 5-line email because she wanted sole credit for the launch. She wanted to stand at that podium and have the investors understand that she had made this happen. She wanted her father to come home and find that she had not just maintained the company but expanded it. And she had decided, in whatever calculation she made alone, in whatever blind confidence she had accumulated from years of being told she was exceptional, that the fastest way to do that was to remove me before the cameras turned on. She revoked my credentials the same minute she sent the email. Building access, system login, database permissions, all of it, all at once, executed with the thoroughness of someone who had planned this specific action and had not thought past it. Stellan checked his screen across the breakfast table. "It tripped," he said. "I know," I said. Here is what Fallon did not understand. Because she had spent 8 months learning the company's org chart instead of its architecture. ClearPath contained a failsafe. Not a virus, not sabotage. A standard, documented, contractually disclosed intellectual property protection measure that Stellan had insisted on building into the platform's core before I signed my revised contract. The mechanism was simple in concept and brutal in consequence. If my master credentials were ever forcibly revoked without initiating a specific handover protocol, a protocol that required my participation, my authorization codes, my presence in the process, the system would read the action as a potential hostile acquisition attempt and lock itself completely. Every module across every connected hospital network would go dark. Patient intake queues, diagnostic routing, pharmacy coordination, scheduling integrations, all of it, suspended. Not because I had touched a keyboard, because Fallon had. We finished breakfast. Stellan paid the check. I went upstairs and changed into the suit I'd brought. Slate gray, structured, the kind that makes me feel like load-bearing material. Then we went down to a quiet corner of the hotel lobby where Stellan opened his briefcase and spent 45 minutes verifying that every legal mechanism we had established was active, documented, and time-stamped. When he was satisfied, he zipped the briefcase, and we walked into the product launch like two people who had nothing to be afraid of, because we didn't. The conference hall was glass and chrome, and the kind of curated lighting that makes everything look like a business magazine spread. Catering tables ran along the east wall. A stage occupied the far end. Round tables with name cards filled the center, and a wide reception area near the entrance was already filling with the company's senior staff and their guests. My sister was there. Her husband was with her, standing near the drinks table, with the posture of a man who has decided in advance that he is the most interesting person in the room. My brother-in-law works in private real estate acquisitions, or he presents himself as doing so, which in his case amounts to roughly the same thing at social events, and something considerably different on paper. He has always had a sharp nose for money and a poor instinct for where that money actually came from. He had never liked me. Not really. Not since the year I bought my own apartment, and he had to stop suggesting I was one bad quarter away from needing to borrow from my family. He spotted me from across the room, and his face did something quick and calculated. A flicker of readiness, like a card player who's heard a rumor about the other hand. He crossed the room with my sister close behind him. "Heard there's some kind of technical issue," he said. Not a question, a probe. "System's been down all morning. They pushed the start time back." He tilted his head. "Also heard Fallon made some changes to the team as of today." He let that hang there. "You doing okay?" My sister touched my arm in the way that looks like concern and functions as reconnaissance. "Oh, Dara, is it true? Did she actually?" "Let's call it a restructuring," my brother-in-law said, smiling. He shook his head with the performance of sympathy. "You know, I've always said the corporate world is brutal. You pour yourself into something and the moment someone with the right last name decides they want the credit, it's over. That's just how it works." He spread his hands. "It's not personal. It's just how the game gets played." "You've never said that," I said. "You've said the opposite. You've spent 4 years telling me I was too risk-averse." He kept going. "The thing is, you're brilliant. Genuinely. But brilliant and politically savvy are different muscles, and you only ever trained one of them. He nodded toward the stage. Meanwhile, Fallon's about to go up there and take a bow for a platform she had nothing to do with, and there's not a thing you can do about it from the outside. He shrugged. That's the lesson. My mother appeared at my left elbow. She has an instinct for arriving at the moment of maximum damage, as if she has a biological sensor for it. She looked between me and my brother-in-law and back at me with the expression I know better than any other expression in the world. The one that is 1 part genuine fear and 3 parts embarrassment, that the fear is visible. "What happened?" she said, very quietly. "Tell me what happened." "Fallon fired me this morning," I said. "Before the launch." My mother pressed her fingertips together. Her eyes went to the room, to the people, to what they might be seeing. "Dara, you need to go find her. Whatever you said, whatever the disagreement was, you apologize and you fix it. Right now, before anyone else notices." "I didn't say anything," I said. "You must have done something." Her voice tightened. "People don't fire someone on a day like this for no reason." My brother-in-law nodded with the energy of a man who has been waiting to nod. "Your mother's right. Eat the pride, get back in the door. You can rebuild from inside." He paused. "Unless," and here he looked thoughtful, which is always when he is least trustworthy, "unless you want to take a step back, reassess, maybe look at some opportunities outside the tech sector. I know some people in commercial real estate who are always looking for analytical minds." I looked at him carefully. I had been looking at him carefully, in one way or another, for several years. "Speaking of real estate," I said, "I've been meaning to ask you something." His expression stayed friendly. "The 3 acquisitions you made last year, the warehouse conversion in Phoenix, the mixed-use property near the Nashville Medical Corridor, the small logistics site outside Denver." A pause. "All 3 within 6 weeks of visits to our home. Visits during which you used our guest network, and I was on calls about ClearPath's national expansion roadmap." I watched his face the way you watch ice when you're not sure how thick it is. "Has the network logs. Full access history, time-stamped, cross-referenced against your purchase dates." I let one more second pass. "You might want to speak to an attorney before you tell me anything else about how the corporate game gets played." The friendliness on his face didn't collapse. It evacuated, like a building being quietly cleared floor by floor. My sister made a small, involuntary sound. My mother turned to look at him, and something in the angle of her head told me she was doing arithmetic she hadn't known she needed to do. Stellan stepped forward from wherever he had been standing, close, always close when it matters, and rested his briefcase on the nearest table. "Misappropriation of proprietary business intelligence," he said, in the tone of someone's citing a tax code. "Potentially securities adjacent, depending on how the trades are structured and what the timeline establishes about the information advantage. The documentation is detailed." He looked at my brother-in-law with an expression of genuine professional interest. "You really should have used your own data plan." My brother-in-law opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Before he could locate any words that would help him, there was a disruption near the main entrance. Voices rising. The specific quality of noise that means something has gone wrong in a way that is becoming public. Fallon came through the crowd, looking like someone who had spent 3 hours discovering the distance between authority and competence. She was still composed enough to be recognizable, but the composure was surface only. You could see the fractures in it if you knew what composure under pressure actually looks like. 2 of the company's senior technical staff followed a step behind her, both wearing the expressions of people who have been asked to solve a problem they were not given the right tools for. She saw me from 10 feet away, and the relief on her face lasted exactly the time it took her to remember what she had done. "Dara." She closed the distance between us. "I need the system restored. The investors are arriving and—" "I don't work here," I said. Her jaw tightened. "I understand this morning was abrupt. I'd like to." You terminated my employment at 9:17 a.m., I said. In writing, copied to HR and to your father's executive assistant. I let that land before I continued. The copy to your father's assistant is important. He received it. Something moved across her face. My father is in Geneva. His assistant forwarded it 40 minutes after you sent it, Stellan said, from beside me. Given the time difference, he's been up for several hours. He called my direct line at 10:02. He paused. He asked me to tell you to sit down. Fallon stared at Stellan. What else did he say? Quite a lot, Stellan said. Most of it is in the legal filing my firm submitted to your HR department this morning, which formally contests the termination, documents the IP violation triggered by the credential revocation, and outlines the grounds for breach of the licensing agreement under Clause 12. He set the briefcase on the table between them, opened it, and withdrew a bound set of documents. ClearPath's license to the company is non-transferable and conditional. One of the conditions is that the lead's architect's employment continues in good standing. Another is that any credential changes require a formal handover protocol with the architect's documented participation. You voided the license when you sent. The system went dark because the license was void. That's not sabotage. That's a contract doing exactly what it was written to do. Fallon looked at the documents for a long moment. She was 26, and she was smart enough to understand what she was reading, and I watched her understand it. Not the legal language specifically, but the shape of it, the weight of what it meant. She sat down in the nearest chair. She didn't make a scene. She just sat down. That, in its own way, was the most honest thing I had ever seen her do. The investors arrived. Stellan's firm had already been in contact with their legal team, and the conversation moved quickly through channels I didn't need to personally manage. The founder called from Geneva during the investor briefing, still in his conference jacket, clearly standing in some hotel corridor. And he told me, directly, that he was sorry, that Fallon's action had not been authorized, and that he was prepared to discuss new terms for my continued involvement in any form I found acceptable. I thanked him. I told him the terms were already being drafted. He said that was exactly what he had expected me to say, and I think he meant it as a compliment. ClearPath came back online at 11:43. I walked into the back room, entered my credentials, still valid, because the wrongful termination had been legally challenged, and stayed within the hour, and restarted the system. Not because anyone begged me to, though some people had tried. Because it's my work. Because 40,000 patients a day move through it. That's the thing about building something that actually matters. The protection was never about leverage. It was about making sure that no one's carelessness could undo something that people depend on. The investors signed their letters of intent that afternoon. The total commitment was $312 million. The signing happened in a room with a view of the city, and I sat at the table, and my name was on the documents, because Stellan had made sure, a long time ago, that it would be. My brother-in-law retained a lawyer within 24 hours of our conversation. He negotiated a quiet resolution in exchange for cooperation. My sister filed for separation 8 weeks later. She called me once, on a Tuesday evening, and said she hadn't known about the network logs or the property trades, and I believed her, and we stayed on the phone for almost an hour, talking about things we hadn't talked about in years. I don't know yet what we are to each other now, but I think we might be finding out. My mother stopped calling to ask when I was going to slow down. I don't know if that's growth or exhaustion, but I'll take either. The co-signing arrangement on her mortgage ended the month after the launch. She found a smaller place and, from what my sister tells me, has become very interested in a community garden. Stranger things. Fallon left the company. I heard she took a role at a marketing consultancy across town. I don't wish her anything bad. I think she was handed too much before she knew what things cost, and that's a difficult way to learn anything. But it isn't mine to fix. My new contract was finalized 6 weeks after the launch. My name is on the patents. The licensing terms are explicit. The title on my business cards is accurate for the first time since I started. Stellan and I went to a cabin in Colorado for 10 days and didn't talk about work for most of them. One evening on the back porch, cold air coming down off the mountains, he looked at me over his coffee and said, "You knew it would be launch day specifically. You didn't just think she might. You knew." I looked at the mountains for a moment. "She needed maximum impact," I said. "She thought the worse the timing, the more desperate I'd be to fix it. She didn't understand that the worse the timing, the more visible and documentable the damage would be." I paused. She played the hand she thought she had. I just knew what hand for a while. Then he said, "Remind me never to play cards anywhere near you." I laughed. It was the first time in weeks that it came easy and it sounded right, out there in the cold with the mountains holding still behind it. There's a particular kind of clarity that comes from spending years doing the actual work while other people plan what to do with the credit. You get precise about what belongs to you. You stop performing uncertainty about your own value to make other people comfortable. You build your protections before you need them, because the moment you need them is never the moment you have time to build them. You build them on an ordinary Saturday at your kitchen table, while someone who loves you reads through clause after clause and makes the language sharper. That's where the real work happened. Not in the conference hall, not in the confrontation, in the contract, in the years of showing up exactly as skilled as I am and not apologizing for it. What Fallon learned in the end, and what my brother-in-law learned, and what my mother is still slowly learning, is the same thing. Borrowed authority is not the same as real power. Real power is built in the details that nobody bothers to read until the morning. Those details are the only thing standing between them and a very expensive mistake. I had been building mine for years. I was ready at 9:17 on a Tuesday morning in March. And I will be ready tomorrow, and the morning after that, because that is what it means to know exactly what you've built, and to have made absolutely certain it belongs to you.